Hi, Anna.
Hi.
I'm going to just ask you a few questions about your project. And first of all, I want to know how your idea was born or where it came from.
All right. Well, basically in the class, Patrick proposed the idea of identity, and we talked a lot about how we come to conclusions about identity, how identity changes. So I wanted to make my project about that, and I ended up kind of getting stuck on the idea of identity because there's just so many things to consider. My culture, I was born in Puerto Rico, I moved here when I was very young, so even though I basically grew up here in the mountains, part of my soul, part of my heart still belongs to the island, even though I only visit the island every so often, every couple of years. But it's still very much a part of who I am. Another thing that I was thinking about when it comes to identity is my outward appearance. I am not your typical specimen, I guess is the way to put it. I am very odd. I dye my hair pretty much every other week. I have tattoos, I have piercings. So a lot of the time when people look at me, they don't really know what to expect, and I recognize that and I understand that. So I usually don't go out and talk and discuss with people. I let them kind of come to me first. So that's kind of how I roll. So keeping that in mind, I was thinking about, okay, how can I translate that into a visual way, a visual message? So immediately I thought about a skull, because it is kind of that alternative thing, and it's also something that could be considered scary or very off-putting. Specifically, I picked a bird skull because birds kind of terrify me, and that's a little thing that I have. It's a long story. But I was playing around with a bird skull idea, and Laura mentioned that we were going to play with PMC, precious metal clay, and I've never used that material before. I'm like, awesome. So I can work with a bird skull, but I want to make it really rough and abrasive, and what better material than that hard metal material. So I was starting to think, okay, what can I do with metal? Is it going to be a piece of jewelry? Is it going to be a locket? And I like the idea of the locket being able to open up, show the inside while having this outside that people can see, but once you actually put in a little bit of effort, open it up and see who that person actually is. So on the inside, I wanted to have a lot of color, a lot of lightness. I wanted to use fibers since that's my passion and my concentration, and I love it. So I was thinking about a lot of stuff. And so because of that, I had a lot of planning, and that usually happens when I am given a concept. If I'm just making art for art's sake, I'm very free and loose and I just play. But in this case, I did a lot of sketching. As you can see in my sketchbook, I sketched out my bird skull. I did an inside perspective of what I was thinking of for the inside. I was thinking of painting in the inside at first, and obviously that changed as I worked. But yeah, that's how my artwork was born.
Nice. What did you discover as you're working with the materials, or even through this process?
I discovered that PMC is a very unusual and difficult material to work with. I've never worked with it before, so Laura was able to give us a little bit of a demonstration, give us a little bit of insight of how to work with the material, but I was working with the material in an incredibly different way as opposed to how other people were using it. A lot of people were stamping and doing flat works, and what I wanted to do was very sculptural and three-dimensional, so I had to think about how I could do that. And that was pretty challenging, and also the fact that it's so delicate and that it can break very easily, which I will tell you about in a little bit.
Okay, nice. So you discovered things about the materials, but then what did you discover about yourself and yourself as a teacher or an artist?
One thing that I recognize about myself as a person is once I get an idea for, and I guess I always kind of knew about this, is I get absorbed in it and I kind of get lost in it, and the rest of the world around me just shuts down, and I just focus 100% in the artwork, so I get really involved. And sometimes that's a blessing, sometimes that's a curse. Curse this time because I had so many big ideas and we only had 8 hours to execute, and I'm a fibers person and it's very time intensive, so a lot of the stuff that I had in my mind was probably a 2-week project. So I had to think about how to edit myself and take it back and see how I can execute my idea but in a simpler way. As a teacher, what I learned is that sometimes I kind of forget the process that my kids go through, and I know that a lot of kids might even think the way that I do. I was so overwhelmed with the idea of identity because there's so much involved with it, and I'm sure that as a student somebody could have that exact same issue. So having that time to kind of sit back and think about it and maybe even focus your direction a little bit more so you know where you're going with it instead of getting overwhelmed and just sitting there like a lump. And I remember so many times when I introduce the concept to my students and I'm like, okay, now get to work. Some of them just sit there and I'm like, why are you just sitting there? Get to work. And now I understand, oh yeah, because they're still processing and thinking about that, and I kind of lost that over the years. So yeah, as a maker, one thing that I realize is I think very complex, and I had that need to edit.
Good. And you talked about your big idea and what guided you. So while you were going on this, going through this process, how did your inner critic guide or obstruct your progress?
My inner critic guided me quite a bit because I had very intensely planned what I wanted to do. So my inner critic was like, keep doing it, you have the plan, you can do this and everything like that. But then when things were not going according to plan, especially with the PMC, a material I've never used before, I was kind of fighting my inner critic who was saying, keep working on it, keep trying to do it. And then the other side was saying, well, break it down. How can you make this work? And how can you still get your meaning across, but making it simpler and embracing what is happening with the material?
So what was that particular roadblock?
When I had sculpted the bird skull out of the PMC, I had it perfectly sculpted and it was ready to go, but I didn't realize the drying time. And I was trying to pull it off of the little clay armature I had made, and while I was pulling it off, it basically just crumbled in my hands. It just collapsed. And that was a little discouraging, but then when I was starting to reattach the pieces, I started realizing the cracks that I wanted to have on the skull itself was looking so much nicer. It was starting to look so much more realistic and distressed, which I'm a huge fan of distressing. So I decided, okay, I can make this work. And so I started making some slip out of the PMC and reattaching the skull. And I ended up spending pretty much the entire day just on that skull. So I didn't get to my fibers part, but I ended up doing that at home because as I was working, I was like, okay, I can simplify this. I still want to talk about my identity, so how can I work with that? And so originally I had planned on using embroidery floss and having it interlock and woven in an interesting way, but for time's sake, I ended simplifying it and doing little paintings on black canvas and cutting it up and weaving those together. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Anna, and excited to see when the PMC comes back what that looks like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.